Good afternoon, and welcome back to the final presentation of the 2021 Wills Week Conference. I'm John McKee, Acting Associate Vice President of Philanthropy for the University of Maryland, Baltimore, and the Director of the Office of Planned Giving. Our final speaker, Elizabeth Green, JD, is a member of the Wealth Preservation Department at Pessin Katz Law. She advises individuals in both basic and sophisticated estate planning needs. Elizabeth has also assisted many clients in addressing the unique issues surrounding disabled and elderly family members. Elizabeth is a board member and active volunteer in the Baltimore Estate Planning Council and speaks regularly on topics related to estate planning, estate and trust administration, and business succession planning. Today, Elizabeth will be speaking on the subject of how to navigate Medicare, Medicaid, and long-term care. She will describe the difference between Medicare and Medicaid and the role of long-term care insurance in helping people pay for the higher level of services and care they need later in life. While this presentation is about protecting assets and preserving wealth, it is also about the dignity of yourself and your loved ones and the quality of life around those closest to someone who needs assistance in daily living. Thank you, Elizabeth. Please take it away.
Thank you very much, John. And I want to start at the outset by thanking my colleague, Cheryl Jones, who has given this presentation in the past. Cheryl is enjoying some sun and has graciously allowed me to present to you and shared some of her research for me to use in speaking. So I'm going to start the PowerPoint right now. And the important thing to think about at the outset, as I'm just setting this up, is that when we're talking about navigating Medicare and Medicaid and long-term care, it's all part of the integrated plan that you've been hearing about all day today. So you've heard a lot about estate planning documents, and I'll talk a little bit more about that throughout this presentation. And you've also heard a bit about insurance, and I'll speak about that as well. So I want to dive in, and I don't want to duplicate other things that you've heard. But the one thing that I want to start, and I'm probably going to say it about 4 times during the presentation, I'm going to come back several times to the need for a power of attorney. I'll speak very specifically about it and where it comes into play. But as you're listening, please keep in mind that that's one of the most important documents that as we age, we should have in place to assist others with helping to assist us and to take care of us. In understanding what we're talking about also, I want to make the differentiation between Medicare and Medicaid. So Medicare is health insurance, and it's health insurance that can provide and pay for a lot of medical care. You qualify for Medicare based on age, and you may have a higher or a lower cost, but it's not something that has an income threshold in order to qualify. There's an age threshold, but everyone can qualify regardless of their income. It's just a question of what their premiums and their copays may be. Medicaid, which is in the longer word, medical assistance, is something that does it looks at in order to qualify, we're looking at your resources, your income. All right, so let's get started on the actual discussion of what we're talking about today. So long-term care options. When we start the conversation about long-term care, and I will try to speak primarily about, and with the idea that we're talking about someone else, may slip a little bit into talking about ourselves, but for the most part, when we're looking at long-term care options, we're looking at them for someone else. So As we age or as we have any sort of health issues that might require a level of assistance, we need to look sometimes at getting assistance with providing for our needs. And so ideally, that can be provided for at home. And sometimes it can be provided for at home by family members. That is often the most cost efficient way of achieving care, but it's not always the best way of achieving care. It's great when we can care for our loved ones ourselves, but we always want to look at giving a person the best possible care available based on the situation. So sometimes we have to hire people to provide that care. As long as there are financial resources to hire someone at home, and we can get the kind of care we need at home, that's a wonderful thing. It can be extremely expensive. If you're looking at hiring some sort of a caregiver in your home, the expectation should be that if you're going through some sort of an agency, you're probably going to be paying somewhere between $22 and $26 an hour for the caregivers. The fewer hours you need a caregiver, the more expensive it is, and the per hour. And then the more hours you're using, you get the benefit of the amount of time. And so you're going with a less expensive hourly rate, but more expensive, obviously, day rate. A quick note on using agencies versus independently hiring someone. Agencies provide you with bonding. It provides you with backup if the person who's supposed to be there isn't available. Usually someone else will be able to fill in. The agency does their best to provide for that. Again, they're bonded. You have a formal contract that lays out all the terms. If you are working with an agency, read those terms, because sometimes certainly if you have someone 7 days a week, you're probably not expecting to pay time and a half for weekends. So if from the outset you're contracting to have someone full-time, you want to make sure that you've considered that and what happens on holidays. What about vacations? If you take the person on vacation, are you still going to have to pay for the home healthcare aid? So that's home healthcare. That's bringing someone into your home. If you bring someone in not through an agency, you need to make sure that you've laid out all the terms as carefully as possible, contracting as carefully as possible, and you run the risk of, if someone is sick, you may not have healthcare that day, and that can be problematic. Same as when we're dealing with daycare for children. So sometimes a caregiver who's not a home healthcare aide, but just a family member, can combine that with an adult daycare of some sort. Adult daycare is pretty much the way it sounds. It's a place that an adult can go to receive, to do activities, sometimes to receive some sorts of assistance with their health needs. And it's during the day. And it's less expensive, certainly, than having 24-hour care at home. It's easier on the family member caregiver than providing all of the care at home. So sometimes this is a great option to keep someone occupied, and if they're able to engage in activities, and if they're also able to be transported, because that's not always an option. The next level of care that we look at is looking at assisted living facilities. So we have a lot, I know we have people from across the country, but I'm here in Maryland, and in Maryland, we have lots of assisted living facilities, and we have wonderful assisted living facilities. Some of them are more institutional, some of them are more home-based. Even the institutional ones have a tendency to try to look a little bit more home-like. Someone goes in, they are There are activities. You have your own room usually. Generally in an assisted living facility, you're not sharing a room with anybody else. If you have a couple who needs to go into assisted living, many assisted living facilities can accommodate a couple in one living arrangement. The assisted living facilities tend to vary between having a single room, maybe with a shared bathroom, or maybe with your own bathroom, to having 1 or 2 bedrooms, or 1 or 2 rooms to live in. So assisted living can be a very nice way of getting care. Meals are made for you. Generally, there are very limited cooking facilities, a sink, maybe a microwave in a person's individual apartment. So your meals are provided. Generally, they take care of dispensing medication. There is a flat fee for the assisted living facility, and then usually a level of care cost layered on top of that flat fee. Assisted living facilities do not generally participate with medical assistance. So generally, you're looking at private pay. Some of them have gotten into a Medicaid waiver program, which we won't spend a lot of time on, but there may be a possibility of Medicaid paying for someone in an assisted living facility, but rarely. And assisted living facilities are, it used to be you got turned out if you needed too much care. Some of them are finding ways to provide almost a full level of nursing home care. They are regulated by the state, and can be a really good option for someone who's no longer comfortable living at home. If an assisted living facility is not the right place, doesn't provide enough care, then we're looking at nursing homes. And that's where we're going to focus when we're talking about Medicaid, and a little bit on the Medicare end as well. Nursing homes provide all of the care. It's like a hospital level of care, just shy of a hospital level of care. And there are really wonderful nursing homes out there. It's always important to watch what's going on with your loved one, whether in the adult daycare, assisted living, or nursing home. Obviously, the more they see of someone coming in, the more they know that someone's watching, and not to imply that good care won't be given if no one's watching, but we all know that having an advocate is helpful. Again, we'll talk about paying for it in just a minute, but I want to talk about continuing care retirement communities, referred to as CCRCs. So continuing care retirement communities, for those of you who are local, you may have heard of Oakcrest or North Oaks, Charlestown, Leisure World. So those are a few of the different names of some in this area, and there are continuing care communities all around the country. In theory, when one moves into a continuing care community, there is an asset/resource assessment at the beginning. They look to see if you look like you'll have enough money to spend the rest of your life there. They make a slightly conditional commitment to you that they will keep you there even if you run out of money, and you buy into it. There's some sort of an initial payment. Sometimes that's refundable, sometimes it's not, depends on the community. And then you pay a monthly fee for, depending on what kind of a unit you've received, the fee you pay is different. In a continuing care community, you generally have a real apartment. You have your own kitchen, bathroom, or rooms, bedroom. They provide different levels of service, maybe cleaning, care, and some other things. And they also probably have some shared meals. Continuing care communities, the continuing care concept is that they also have day care facilities, assisted living facilities and ultimately the health suite or nursing home care. And so the expectation is you move in and hopefully you love it and you are going to stay there for the rest of your life. And it can be a really good option, particularly for really for anyone, but particularly for someone who doesn't have a lot of family or friend support that may be able to be there to assist them with aging in place, because the continuing care community will provide that assistance of aging in place / transitioning within the community. I recently was speaking with a woman who's only in her 60s, I believe, and suggested that as she decides what she wants to do next, she might consider a continuing care community, because she is a person who doesn't have a lot of family support or friend support. And my experience with another client is that it is quite traumatic to suddenly go from independent living to an assisted living facility, particularly when you're cognitively fine. And so it's something to give some thought to, because in that kind of a situation, the transition can be done when it's 100% your decision, or the decision of your loved one, and then they just age in, and as they get older and need greater levels of care, they're already where they're going to be able to get that care. Those communities have what's called a benevolent fund, and they ask people sometimes to give back money from their deposit to the benevolent fund, because for the most part, with a bit of an asterisk, once you're in for good, and unless you choose to leave. And so they will keep you even if you run out of money. So I want to talk for just a moment. I don't want to get too into numbers, about some statistics. So Medicare is not the way that most people are paying for a nursing home. For the most part, Medicaid is paid for either privately or, nursing homes are paid for either privately or through Medicaid. And in this article from 2010, at that point, 6 in 10 residents of a nursing home were on Medicaid. What's important to understand about that is that a lot of people think that once you go on Medicaid, your only options are the rundown, horrible basement of a nursing home, and you're going to get bad care, and they're not going to pay attention to you, and fill in whatever other scary things. Sorry, I thought we have a new phone system. I apologize. I thought I had done something so it wouldn't ring, but apparently did not. But really, if you look at that, if 60% of all people in nursing homes are on medical assistance, that's just not the case. Almost all nursing homes take medical assistance. It is actually their best way of making sure that they get paid. Because with a private pay, you never know. Someone might not pay or might run out of money. So this idea that going into a nursing home and going on medical assistance means you'll get bad care, that's just a horror story, and not the reality. So how do we pay if we need to go into a nursing home and the nursing home costs are $12,000 a month? Not everybody has $12,000 a month that they can use to pay for long-term care. How do we do it? It's a combination of a lot of things. So Medicare pays for some portion of nursing home care, and I'll go through the specifics in a couple of slides of what Medicare pays for. Some people have long-term care insurance that pays for their stay in a nursing home. Some people are paying out of pocket, and then other people are looking at medical assistance. And some people are going to find that over time, it's a combination of all of those things. So again, I'll go through the very specifics of Medicare in a couple of slides, but let's talk for a minute about long-term care insurance. You've heard about insurance. Generally speaking, we suggest that clients, when they're in their 50s and 60s, begin to look at the cost of long-term care insurance. It is costly. It is not an inexpensive thing, but it can be a godsend, because what long-term care insurance often does is it bridges the gap between when a person goes into some sort of a facility and when they might have all their ducks in a row for applying for medical assistance, or they're using it for the home health care period. And then when they go into a facility again, then they're looking at medical assistance. So long-term care insurance can really, really be a terrific thing. I don't sell it, but I do sell it. And when I say that, I mean that I really recommend that people at least price it. Sometimes it's too pricey, but at least price it. There are lots of different products out there, some of them that are combined with life insurance. And if you think of it as an investment that you want to get back, it may not really be a very good investment. But if instead, as I've sort of begun to think about it, you're thinking about it a little bit more along the lines of your health insurance or your car insurance, you need to have it. And if you need it, it can be a humongous help, but you might not actually get back what you paid in. And in some ways, you kind of hope you don't. So, changing the framework of how people think about long-term care insurance, I think, is important, because the more of us that get it, the better the products are going to be, the more products there are going to be. And the more likely that the insurance companies are going to stay in business, because if the only people who are getting it are people who are using it, then they have a problem and they're running out of money. There are definitely many people who self-pay for their long-term care. I'm going to suggest that you consider whether at some point it would be appropriate to transition over to medical assistance paying for your long-term care, even if you have the financial resources. So why would I suggest that? I suggest it for a couple of reasons. One, if a person is married, we certainly don't want to see the spouse impoverished, running out of money in order to pay for the nursing home. We all want the best for our loved ones. But as kids, certainly, if we're looking at our parents, they're both our loved ones. And so we want the person in long-term care to get the best possible care, but we also want to make sure the person who's at home is getting the best possible care and has resources and isn't going without, so that the person in the nursing home has. And what happens if you run out of money and you're not qualified for a nursing home? Because there are some people who, they never qualify for a nursing home, but they need to have a roof over their heads and they need to have food to eat. Another thing is that it is okay to protect an inheritance. I don't think that that's a wrong thing for children to look at. You have parents sometimes who have sacrificed in order to do for their children and to be able to provide for their children. And if it is lawful, and we can do it in lawful ways, there's nothing to be embarrassed about saying, I'd like to look to see if I can protect an inheritance so that I'm in a place to retire someday. I'm in a place to benefit from what my parents have built up. So that's my own. There may be people who have a different view of it, But I think it's okay to look at that as a reason why you wouldn't want to self-pay forever. And then obviously paying for long-term care, we look at medical assistance. And as I said before, that is the largest amount of money that's going toward long-term care insurance. 60% of the people in, sorry, I keep saying long-term care insurance, 60% of people in long-term care it is being paid for by medical assistance. So let's talk for a second about the long-term care timeline. And I think here it's important to understand it is neither too early nor too late. Never too early, never too late to look at some level of planning for long-term care. So what does that mean? Obviously, at some point, it's a little bit too early to plan for it. A healthy person in her 40s doesn't really need to be looking at long-term care. But remember, I mentioned powers of attorney. Powers of attorney, that's a really important piece of making sure that you are in a place someday to have your, sorry, I advanced unintentionally, 1 second. That's a really important piece of making sure that when it comes time to engage in true long-term care planning, you will have people in place to do it. Why? Because when it comes to having someone help us with our financial and legal affairs, if we do not have a person designated in writing in a financial power of attorney, our only option is a guardianship. Now, guardianships are not horrendous. They're not incredibly expensive to obtain, but they're time consuming and they create delays. And so ideally, when you are beginning the process, you're going to have a power of attorney in place at a young age because accidents happen. I worked in a law firm a number of years ago, and there was a woman in her 30s who had a very tragic accident. She happened to have, the firm had just introduced some long-term care insurance and she had gotten some. I don't honestly recall, I don't believe she had a power of attorney in place, but she did have long-term care insurance and it made a big difference. But had she had a power of attorney in place, then she also could have made sure that the person she wanted was the person who was going to be caring for her, because as I recall, that was a little bit of a problem. So what else goes into the pre-crisis phase? And this means when you're healthy, when you have the time to just sort of think about it and you're putting all your ducks in a row, identifying assets and making lists. Make sure, I met with some clients and they said, well, what happens? Who knows what we have? What happens if we're both gone and everything's on the computer? So I said, make a list, put it in a sealed envelope, give it to me. And that way I'll know what assets you have. Some people provide me with a copy of all of their insurance policies, all of their other various documents, even copies of stock certificates sometimes, so that I have a sense of what there is and I can recreate the asset if I need to. Because when you apply for medical assistance, you need to be able to identify and outline every single asset that the person who is making that for whom that application is being made has. I dwelled a tremendous amount on powers of attorney, but you also want to make sure your other estate planning documents are in place. Look and make sure that your will, your beneficiary designations also, and your medical directives say what you want them to say, that they're the right people. People age, people move. Do you have the right things there to make sure that if you do need to use these documents, or when you do need to use these documents, they properly reflect your wishes. Now, one thing that I want to say in addition with regard to the power of attorney is attorneys who do not focus on elder law tend to prepare a financial power of attorney with a limited gifting ability. So what does that mean? If I'm giving my husband the right to manage my assets, to be me for financial and legal purposes, I may not want to give him the right to give away my assets. Certainly, if we didn't have if all of our children weren't the children of one of the other, if it's a second marriage with kids from previous marriages, I might not want to give him the right to give away my assets. But for medical assistance purposes, for elder law planning, I absolutely want to be able to have my agent under my power of attorney make gifts, because that's one of the most crucial methods of providing for the spend down that will allow you to qualify for medical assistance. Additionally, consolidating and simplifying your assets. So actually, my colleague Cheryl tells a funny story about when she was talking to her father-in-law, and she saw he had all these different accounts everywhere, and she said, "Dad, did you get a toaster for every account you opened? Why would you have accounts at 15 different banks?" So I don't know why people have pieces of money in all sorts of different places, but it's helpful to your loved ones, whether it's for long-term care planning or just the ultimate eventuality of death, to simplify those assets, pull them together, put them with one financial advisor, put them in one bank, or if you're particularly concerned about FDIC protections, put it in two banks, whatever it may be. Make it so that it'll be easier for the people who are ultimately helping to take care of you to find those assets and use them. And if we're doing medical assistance planning, liquidate them for you. And then the last piece of this pre-crisis phase is this idea of assessing what your housing and care needs are. So downsizing. Sometimes downsizing can allow a person to stay at home a whole lot longer. And people are hesitant to do it, but thinking about whether you should not make your kids force you to move out of your 3-story home with the laundry in the basement, but rather choosing a new place to live that is more appropriate for your phase of life. Some people don't want to move, some people can't move. So, a person may be living in a home that was built by their grandfather. Can you move the laundry upstairs just so that you're not risking a fall every time you go to do a load of laundry, or using your energy unnecessarily? So assessing your housing and care needs also is part of this pre-crisis planning. But again, remember, never too early, never too late. So I promised I would talk to you about Medicare and what role it has in paying for long-term care So in order for Medicare to pay for time in a nursing home, a person must be transitioning from a hospital to the nursing facility, and must be transitioning from an inpatient stay of 3 or more days to the nursing home facility. So if a person has been in a hospital, maybe there was a fall and ended up in a hospital and was admitted to that hospital for at least 3 days, then Medicare is paying while in the hospital even after Medicare stops paying, there might be some amount that's covered by other insurance. And then when that person transitions to the nursing home, Medicare continues to pay on some level as long as the individual is medically qualified. So the need for the nursing facility must be for acute skilled care, not just simply, I'm afraid to go home, which is totally reasonable, but that can't be the reason that a person is in the nursing home facility if you want Medicare to pay for any of those days. So the first 20 days that an individual who qualifies based on the above criteria for a nursing home, the first 20 days, Medicare pays 100% of the stay. No copay, nothing. So you've got 20 days to think about how you're going to pay, how you're going to deal with this new reality of life in a nursing home. From days 21 through 100, there is a copay currently in 2021 of $185.50 per day. Sometimes that copay will be picked up by the other insurance. Sometimes it's going to be an out-of-pocket. And so I had recently received a question from someone who was looking at possibly having to put his father into a nursing home. Should he drop his father's secondary insurance? No, because it might be useful, certainly at a minimum, for that days 21 through 100. And then after day 100, 101 and beyond, Medicare no longer has a role in paying for the long-term care stay. Now, if the person in the nursing home ends up in the hospital, Medicare may step back in to pay for things, even with the person's health care, seeing doctors while in the nursing home facility. There may be places where Medicare is stepping in, but the actual life in the nursing facility is no longer going to be paid for by Medicare. The patient is 100% responsible for that. Okay. So we've transitioned Dad to a nursing home, and we are trying to figure out what we're going to do. That's really, I think one of the things that you're going to do at the very beginning is you're going to meet with a social worker, probably from the nursing home facility, maybe even from the hospital before you go into the nursing home. And the social workers are going to be incredibly helpful in talking through lots of different issues. Not a bad idea to put in a phone call to your estate planning attorney at that point. If your estate planning attorney does not understand elder law, do not expect your estate planning attorney to understand anything that you're saying. They're really two very related but different areas of the law. Some estate planning attorneys do elder law. Most elder law attorneys do estate planning. Not all elder law attorneys do tax planning, which some estate planning attorneys do. So there's an overlap, but make sure you're meeting with someone who has a specialty in elder law. If your particular attorney doesn't, maybe he or she has a partner who does, or what have you, but sit down and have an initial consultation. It's going to be well worth the cost to just understand what your options are. You can reject those options, but if you've never had that conversation, then you're going to find yourself in a difficult position if you're constantly playing catch up. So we're going to assess the financial status of the individual who's in the nursing facility and look at what the different options are that exist for paying for for that nursing home. We talked about the power of attorney. Is there a power of attorney? If there isn't, we might have to look at a guardianship. And then look at whether you should engage in medical assistance planning. So What does that even mean? And I apologize. Again, we have a new phone system, which has sort of messed some stuff up. I'm trying to keep it quiet. Can you fill out an application for medical assistance by yourself without paying an attorney to do it? Absolutely. Should you? Maybe not. A person who has literally no money, maybe they can actually just fill out that medical assistance application and be fine. If it is a person who has engaged in, who has any resources, even just has a home, has resources, has anything complicated in his or her life, and or has maybe given money, whether thinking it was a gift or thinking it was supporting another individual, but that medical assistance is going to consider having been a gift, you shouldn't be filling it out on your own. You should be getting help to do it. You want to qualify on the first try. Why? Well, because when we make our medical assistance application, the first day that we make that application, when ultimately we qualify, it dates back to when we made that application. And it's really important to not have to pay for any extra days in that nursing home than necessary. So qualifying, a single applicant has to spend down below $2,500 prior to the first day of the month in which they're seeking benefits. Be very careful if you have a $2,500, an account with $2,500 on it and Social Security going into that, make sure that it's not going to go over $2,500, because if it does, that's going to be a problem. If we have a married applicant, it's a combination. We're looking at the actual applicant, the person going in the nursing home, not having more than $2,500 in his or her own asset, in his or her own name. The spouse can have a lot more, can have, so this is written here as the lesser of 130,380, or 1/2 of the total combined assets. So if the total combined assets are 200,000, then the applicant spouse is going to be able to keep 100,000. If the total combined assets are $1 million, it's going to be 130,380. So that actually doesn't sound so good, because if it's a person who has $1 million and they have to spend down to $130,000, that's not so great. And maybe the concept of qualifying for medical assistance doesn't sound so good. But it actually may be okay, because that's not really the final answer to qualifying for medical assistance. We can accelerate Medicaid eligibility in 3 different ways. We can spend those assets. So a person who really doesn't have a whole lot more might pay the mortgage, might pay down the credit card bill, do other things. Maybe the family's going to buy a car that's going to be used to transport the person. There are lots of different things that can be done to use the assets if you're close to qualifying, but a little bit over. A place where I use that the most is if I have a young person who's disabled. I may end up using that method of actual spending the assets. You can gift those assets. So gifting is complicated, not for the novice, without giving some consideration and having some conversations. When you apply for medical assistance, there's a 5-year look back. You have to provide the medical assistance board with 5 years of bank statements, and they look and they really will identify what was that $100 check to John Doe for. They look at it. They want to know what it is. And very often it was a totally legitimate. He mowed my lawn 5 times. But they're going to look. And if you gift assets and it is deemed to be a disqualifying gift, every $10,190 of gift disqualifies you for 1 month in the nursing home. So $100,000 of gifted assets during that 5-year period would disqualify a person for about 10 months. And it doesn't matter if the gifting happened the day before going into the nursing home or 4 years and 11 months before going into the nursing home. It's the same disqualification, $10,190 per month. When you have a married couple, though, there's a lot more that can be done. And one of the things that can be done is taking otherwise available resources. Part of that, I mentioned $1 million before, what goes into that 130,000, and purchasing a single premium immediate annuity. What that means is we're turning otherwise problematic resources into an excluded asset because it's a stream of income, and the spouse can have income. The person in the facility is going to have to turn over much, if not all, of the income to the nursing home to pay for the care, but the spouse is allowed to have an income, and that annuity, number one, can provide some assistance if we income over a short period of time, gets all the money back into that community spouse's estate, and they're able to use that money and reinvest it or do whatever, or begin medical assistance planning for themselves in a more thoughtful, slower process, perhaps. Oops, I did not adjust the slide. Again, it's that $10,000 1 month for the $10,000 gifted or transferred, and it begins when the Medicaid application is submitted, and it doesn't start until the applicant is in the facility. So it's 5 years before the application while in the facility. Protecting your family home. So your home is generally going to be protected from medical assistance. If you have a home that you live in it before you go into the nursing home, and your spouse is still living in it, then it's going to be protected, period, as long as the total value of the home is less than, it was $585,000 in 2019. I think it's up a little bit over $600,000 right now. And title has to be held in the name of the applicant and the applicant's spouse. If you have $1 million home, it's going to be a problem. You're not going to be able to protect it in that manner. Sometimes we're able to protect it by creating different kinds of deeds. There's something called a life estate deed. If I know I'm going to want to be able to protect my home, give it to my kids, for example, I might put it into a life estate and restrict my ability to sell it in exchange for the benefit of having it protected if I need to go into a nursing home. If I'm in a nursing home and there's not someone still living in the home, a disabled child or a spouse, then medical assistance won't make me sell my home. But after a 6-month stay in the nursing home, they will begin to assess a lien on my home. Now, sometimes people will say, well, if they're going to ultimately get the money and no one's living in the home and there are carrying costs or whatever it may be, why would I want to hold on to the family home if I know, dad's the only one living in the home, he's in the nursing home, he's not coming home again, why don't I just sell it? One reason not to sell it is that medical assistance lien is going to be based on the medical assistance payment to the nursing home. So whatever it is, the $10,000 roughly that medical assistance is paying to the nursing home, that's how much the monthly lien is going to be. If you are private pay, you are most likely paying more than that $10,000. So your cost, private pay might be $130,000 over 10 months, but the penalty would be $100,000. So it still actually ultimately benefits you to hold on to that home, or may benefit you to hold on to that home and qualify for medical assistance. And it's legal. And that's something to always just keep in mind. It is legal. There's nothing wrong with doing it. So what can we do to protect the assets for a spouse? There is a spousal maintenance allowance. Medical assistance allows the spouse to keep a certain amount of money in order to pay for things that need to be paid for. You can use the Medicaid annuity that we talked about a few minutes ago. And also, once the spouse is in the facility, begin to do some planning for the community spouse, the person still living in the community, so that should he or she now at some point need to go into a facility, we're not in crazy mode, we're in thoughtful mode. We've given thought to what needs to be done. I just had a very, very lovely client of mine who had to qualify her husband. Her husband had been at home and then during COVID really declined. And so she had to put him into a facility, and they did not have the funds, legitimately did not have the funds to pay for him to be in the facility for very long. And so she reached out to me and she said, "Is there anything I can do?" And I said, "Absolutely." And we began the process of qualifying him for medical assistance. And it lifted such a burden off of her shoulders as this process was happening. She received the letter confirming that her husband's medical assistance application had been approved on her birthday, and was delighted. Literally, she sent us an email saying that she was crying in Walmart. She was so relieved to know that medical assistance was going to be paying for her husband's nursing home stay. And then he passed away maybe a week or two later. Having only had 2 or 3 months of his nursing home stay covered by medical assistance, and having paid us a lot of money in order for us to do the entire application. So was it worth it? It was worth it. She was so relieved to know that had he remained there for a long period of time, it would have been covered. And it helped her to breathe and to visit him with the joy that their marriage was filled with. Now, there are some people for whom that's not necessarily going to be the case. We know it's going to be a very, very brief stay in the nursing home. They're entering in hospice, whatever it may be. It may not always be worth it. It may be worth doing the private pay for a period of time, particularly if you have more assets that need to be moved around in lots of different directions. But it certainly is worth the conversation to figure out whether it's something that you should do. And that lifting of a burden to allow the former caregiver, who's now just a spouse, coming to visit in the nursing home, to know I'm not going to be impoverished and I can just enjoy the last months of my spouse's life. I think that's what she bought herself, quite frankly.
Elizabeth, I'm sorry to interrupt. This is John, but we're a little over time. So if you wouldn't mind just wrapping up so we can have some time for some questions.
Perfect timing. Just as I said before, never too early to start planning and never too late to protect something. So that's powers of attorney and never too early, never too late. Those are probably the two things I'd love you to remember. Thank you all for listening. Thank you for your participation today and in Wills Week. And I'm happy to answer some questions if we have a few.
Wonderful, thanks. I didn't realize we were so close to the end. Thank you so much. We had a question that relates to the 5-year look back rule. You said liquidate assets before you use or need long-term care assistance. And that you're referring to the 5-year look back rule when you said that. Is that right?
So I think when I was saying that, I was actually talking about just consolidating assets, but in terms of the 5-year look back, there is, when we looked at that idea, you can do it in advance as a person ages, and there are ways to do that.
Mm-hmm. Would this go along with creating a trust to pass along your family's wealth?
So literally, you took the words out of my mouth.
Okay. No, actually, the questioner took the words out of you.
So smart questioner there. And I promise that it wasn't someone from my office who was there to ask a question. So yes, you can create an irrevocable trust, cannot be changed, an irrevocable trust that will hold those assets. If it's my money and it's going into a trust that's going to benefit me, that may be problematic. But if it's my money and it's going into a trust that my kids can use to pay for my care, then that may very well work. And it's a good use of, when you have a good trusting relationship, then it may be a great way to gift those assets in a very orderly manner and still qualify for medical assistance. And you can do it years in advance so that you don't even get into that 5-year look back period.
Okay, great. Oh, we have so many good questions here. With medical assistance, do you need to liquidate all of your assets? You said a little bit about part of your house and part of your spouse's assets are protected, but the question is do you need to liquidate all of your assets to qualify for medical assistance?
So yes and no. You can only have $2,500 in actual assets in the name of the person who's applying for medical assistance. The spouse can have other assets. And actually, something that I neglected to mention is that there are going to be some assets. If all your savings is in retirement accounts, it might not be worth it. It may be too costly in terms of the income tax consequences to liquidate those assets. But you do need to be at the point of $2,500 and the spouse at the lesser of 50% or the $130,000-ish. So yes, other than the house, we are liquidating assets.
Okay. Does Medicare cover hospice care?
Medicare can cover hospice care depending on where it is and how. It certainly can cover that, in that 20-day to 100-day period. But generally, if a person, I guess it depends, Medicare is only going to cover hospital care. And then you would, even if you're in hospice, you would flip over to a medical assistance, looking to medical assistance to pay.
Okay. Do long-term care facilities charge the same amount to someone who has long-term care insurance versus someone who's being paid for by the government?
Great question. No. Medicaid has negotiated rates. And so a facility that agrees to take the guarantee of payment from Medicaid agrees to take a lower rate of that roughly $10,000 a month. They charge for private pay more than that. Just like in any sort of an insurance situation, the doctor's cost is higher than the Medicare reimbursement.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. Racing through these questions, can you remind what are the daily costs that the family pays in days 21 through 100 in the care facility?
So it's about 185.50
A day.
per day. Yeah,
Uh-huh.
and which might be covered by a secondary insurance.
Okay. Here's a good one that I've been wondering myself. Why do you call it medical assistance instead of Medicaid? And after this discussion, how should a listener today respond when asked if they think Medicaid can be considered to pay for long-term care for their parents, even if they have significant assets?
So why do I call it medical assistance instead of Medicaid? I have no idea. It's just a term I'm more comfortable with.
But
It's the same thing.
they're interchangeable terms?
Medicaid is really the shortened term of medical assistance. Yes, they're the same thing. Sorry, don't mean to. It's sort of like we have
I never
advanced
heard that
medical
myself.
directives, and there are lots of different terms.
Okay. And after
and
this
then-
discussion, how should a listener today respond when asked if they think Medicaid can be considered to pay for long-term care for their parents, even if they have significant assets?
Yeah, so I look at it in two different ways. So first of all, because it can, the law allows us to do it, even if we have money, have resources. So we don't have to forego something that we could qualify for just because some people would say, oh, that just doesn't seem right. And it's something to be explored. It's certainly something that should be explored when you have a married couple and one is going into a long-term care facility, because how else are we going to pay, if dad's in the facility and mom is 83 years old, we want to make sure she's paid for the rest of her life. So medical assistance is absolutely something we should look at. And as I said, I don't think there's anything wrong with protecting an inheritance. Mom and dad worked really hard to be able to build it up. And if we can legally and lawfully find a way to take advantage of some government benefits, we're not doing anything wrong. And I think that it's something to be explored. So
let's circle back to an earlier question on that same subject, which is if you are looking at facilities or your family, you put a loved one, you find a facility that a loved one goes into and the family pays initially, and then the money runs out and they qualify for Medicaid. Does their level of care, can the facility shift the level of care if they, go from being paid privately to being paid by Medicaid?
So that it's a great question. And I'm sure that there are facilities that exist where, we're going to move her out of the good room and into the bad room. But
Like
the vast
group room versus a single room.
Right, or just facing a wall as opposed to the beautiful rolling lawn. I'm sure that those facilities exist. I am fortunate not to know them.
Mm-hmm.
For the most part, nothing should change. You should stay the person should stay in the same bed, have the same nurses, have the same everything. When they talk about an allocation of Medicaid beds, it's not literally the bed. It's, we have 100, as we do our accounting, we allocate 100 beds to medical assistance and the other, whatever it may be, 60 to not medical assistance or 30 or whatever it may be. So it should not. And if you see that there is a deterioration in care, you should complain.
Okay.
So that's where you need to have an advocate.
Okay. One final question. What about an adult child who lives at home with the person who gets into a nursing home? Can they stay or do they need to leave because of the lien? I assume they mean like the mortgage. There's a mortgage.
Right. So no, I think they're talking about the medical assistance lien that's going to be attached to the property.
Oh, I see.
And so while your loved one is living, no, you don't need to leave. You can stay there. You can continue living in the home. if you have someone who's disabled living, a disabled child living there, they can generally avoid the lien. There are other ways off also that have to do with someone who's moved into the home for purposes of allowing a parent to stay there, or a person to stay there for 2 years after they otherwise would have qualified for medical assistance or life in a nursing home. Excuse me, not medical assistance, but life in a nursing home. But basically, yeah, while if an adult child is living in the home, while mom or dad is in the nursing home, you can stay there. And it's only after they die and you start to deal with the estate and paying off that lien that it may become necessary to move. Or at that point, maybe you're able to get a mortgage that would pay off the lien. So.
All right, super. Thank you. I think that's about all the time that we have, Elizabeth. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.